Hi, it's Brad from Ocean Consulting Services with the next in our series of videos relating to tax collection topics. Today we'll be talking about the IRS Appeals Office. Can they help me? So let's run through some highlights. As we've discussed in other videos, the IRS formally assesses a tax and demands payment. But that's not the end of the line. There are opportunities for you as the taxpayer to dispute the amounts, to have your situation heard by another party. Now, of course, you can go to court. There's a special court called the tax court, but most people don't. It's time consuming and expensive, so usually does not make sense to bring a matter to tax court. What does that leave you with? The IRS has various levels of assistance, and that's what the topic of this video is. They range from something called CDP, which is collection due process, CAP, collection appeals process, TAS, which is taxpayer advocate service. So in this video, we'll be sort of overviewing those means of contacting the IRS to have your situation reviewed. Let's start out with talking about the Independent Office of Appeals. As I mentioned, once the tax is assessed, the IRS is prohibited from immediately enforcing collection. So just because they assess you a tax doesn't mean they can immediately start seizing your bank account or placing a levy on your wages. They issue a number of notices, and you can contact the IRS at any point in the process and attempt a resolution directly with the IRS. That includes the person you're dealing with directly as well as the person's supervisor. The Office of Appeals is an independent group within the IRS that hears disputes. So this is taking it to the next level within the IRS. The appeals mission statement reads, "Appeals is separate and independent from the IRS examination collection functions that makes tax assessments and initiate collection actions. Our mission is to resolve tax controversies without litigation on a basis which is fair and impartial to both the government and you, and in a manner that will enhance voluntary compliance and your confidence in the integrity and efficiency of the service." Let's highlight how this works through a series of examples. In our first example, you prepare your return, you file it, and you pay the computed tax through either prior payments or payments with the return. Then the IRS disputes certain deductions that you've claimed on the tax return. You argue that the deductions are proper, however, the IRS disagrees and they issue an assessment for the additional tax. You can then request that finding be re-examined by the appeals office. A hearing will be held, which is typically a conference call, where an appeals officer considers your dispute. Appeals can also hear challenges to taxes assessed without your involvement for situations such as a substituted return where the IRS prepares a return without your involvement, or imposition of the trust fund tax penalty where they may make a direct assessment. Now let's talk about the second example. You prepare and file a return. It reflects an amount due, but you don't make a payment. So the IRS issues a number of notices regarding the resulting tax debt. You may or may not attempt to work out a payment solution with them. Regardless of what happens, no solution is agreed, and the IRS issues what is referred to as a final notice and right to a hearing. This is by way of what they call a Letter 11 or a Letter 1058 or a Notice CP-90. All of these notifications have the same impact, which is you have 30 days to request a review by appeals through this process called the CDP, which I mentioned earlier, the collection due process. Now let's talk about the CDP itself. Requesting the CDP prevents the IRS from engaging in collection efforts. In other words, as mentioned, liens and levies. And it results in the forwarding of your case to appeals. It preserves your right to go to tax court if you're not happy with the appeals process decision, but you do need to maintain compliance. And I put that in quotes. We've talked about this before. That means staying current with your tax filings. It means paying estimated taxes if you're required to, payroll tax deposits, etc. Being current, they don't want to have what they refer to as pyramiding of tax liabilities when you're constantly adding to them. In order to forestall collection activities, you need to be in compliance and requesting the CDP hearing within the 30-day period. What if you miss the 30-day period? You can request what they call a CDP equivalent hearing, and this action, if it's taken within a year, will also get your case forwarded to the appeals office. However, importantly, it prevents you from filing with the tax court, and the IRS can continue to enforce collection. In other words, they can levy your wages, they can enforce liens against property, etc. So whether you requested a CDP or a CDP equivalent hearing, that doesn't mean you can't still negotiate with the IRS regarding a payment solution. So you could still be discussing pursuing an installment agreement, a compromise of the debt through an offer in compromise, relief through the innocent spouse provisions, etc. What the filing does is start the process in motion where your case is going to be forwarded and heard by appeals, and it stops the collection activities if it's a regular CDP filing. Now let's talk about the next process. This is the Collection Appeals Process, CAP. It's used when the IRS process is broken. So normal procedures are not being followed by the IRS when it comes to their collection activities. Your case is sent to appeals, so an appeals officer will hear your case and hear your complaints regarding the IRS process. It's important to note that through this process, you can't propose a collection alternative. In other words, you can't request an installment agreement or offer in compromise, etc. But you can deal with issues that arise in connection with a previously filed collection alternative. Now let's talk about the final means of relief within the IRS. This is called the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Their goal is to assist taxpayers experiencing financial hardship and dealing with IRS system issues. For example, a delay of more than 30 days after the regular processing time to resolve a tax issue, non-responsiveness to IRS requests, etc. And I like to think of this group as making things happen. They can cut through the red tape. There's local offices in each state, and it's really a little more personal attention to your situation and, again, breaking through the red tape and the bureaucratic system that is the IRS. Now let's conclude and talk about what's up next. The IRS is a complex government agency. They're charged with the difficult task of enforcing complex tax laws. Their reputation, which is sometimes deserved, is as an inflexible bureaucracy. However, within the IRS, there are processes involved that allow your situation to be heard by a group independent of the normal collection and enforcement groups. Those are as we've talked about, the CDP, the CAP, and the TAS. In our experience, all of these programs have proved beneficial. There is a dedicated group of professionals in these groups. They take their independence from the normal IRS process and procedure seriously, and we've successfully used these groups in multiple situations to resolve tax issues. In our next video, we'll be discussing penalties and abating of penalties. Thanks for joining us, and as always, feel free to reach out to us if we can provide any assistance.